This, however, of course, only lasted so long, along with many other issues. You have the Civil War and then the abolishment of slavery in this country. We've discussed the Civil War a little bit, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that. But shortly after the Civil War, you have two things happen. You have an influx in labor because of the soldiers that were done fighting, and you have the Industrial Revolution starting. So people are leaving farms, which is with an agricultural-based society, and going to work in factories. The majority of those who were in the factories to start were women and children. About 70% of the labor force at that time was women and children. And you didn't have any regulations on how long they had to work or the conditions of working. They didn't even have clocks at that point in time. What you went by was sun up to sundown. Bells said, when you needed to be in, when you could take a short lunch, and then when you could leave. In the Northeast, in Massachusetts, there's the low mill, and this is an image. It was females in this factory. Their working conditions were very poor. They were not getting paid but pennies a week. But that was considered better than being on farms because it was too difficult to get the land that they needed, yes. That Eli Whitney did that, and that's right about this time. And he made most of his profits, though, not from the cotton gin, but he later invented movable parts. And so that was, in this country, what helped the Industrial Revolution boom. So you can have assembly lines. The other thing that's going on at this time is you have one of the first Buy American campaigns. So we're competing with Europe, and they're pushing Buy American products. This is a cloth factory. Again, you see the women working in there. So what this is causing is strife because these soldiers who have returned from the Civil War, they're finding it difficult to obtain labor, obtain work. How are they going to make any money? Because the factory owners find it's in their best interest to have the female and children employed. In 1877, you have the Great Railroad Strike. These are trains on fire. It starts in Virginia. It hits a lot of the major cities at the time: Baltimore, Philadelphia, St. Louis, Chicago. For 45 days in this country, you're having strikes of the railway system, which is the biggest business at the time. They were trying to lay tracks all over this country. They were not paying well. They were not concerned with the conditions of the workers. You also had in Pennsylvania coal mine workers who are interlocked with the railway system. Their conditions were terrible. There was a group called the Molly McGuires who would use violent acts themselves to get their point across that their conditions were not up to human standards. These were Irish immigrants. So you had riots going on throughout the country. Federal assistance is called. A judge of the U.S. Appeals Court declared that federal marshals needed to protect the railroads, and that federal troops could enforce his decision on President Hayes, Rutherford Hayes, sent in federal troops to end the strike through whatever means necessary. They used violence. They did kill people. It was fluffed off through media as just being some transients or drifters, worthless drifters, who were causing these terrorist acts. So throughout the rest of the country, they're not seeing these types of, these images. Some of the major papers at the time would have these, but not through the majority of the country. So once it's all over through force, people don't really think twice of it. The capitalist society that is running this country kind of steamrolls forward. And you don't have very successful unions. You have some. Sometimes they're able to get better conditions. Rarely do they get more pay. After the general strike, there was, they cut their wages twice within a year. They said they would not do that, and they bumped it up a fraction of a percent just to appease the railway workers. So here we are, 1934 is when the strike in Minneapolis happens. This is a major shipping hub in this country at this point. They distribute products all over the Midwest. 1 year earlier, as part of the New Deal package, FDR had a bill that was passed, that the National Recovery Act, that it did two things. It said that unions could negotiate their contracts, and it put unemployed people to work through the People Works Act. So you had a lot of unemployed in the country. They, through the New Deal, there was a lot of federal building going on, highways, so they were putting unemployed to work that way. Well, in Minnesota, there was a group of business owners and bankers who formed a citizens alliance. They used force to not allow unions to be successful. If a union was going to strike, they would have hired marshals physically stop them from striking, use physical force to impose their will. In 1934, the local 574 truckers union was organized well enough to have a general strike. They knew that they had to have numbers on their side, so they used the unemployed at the time. They gave them food and let them hold picket signs for them, so that these people wouldn't be used as scabs or people who are brought in to do work when the union members are striking.